As I begin to recount the events that unfolded in our quaint neighborhood, I can't help but feel a mix of nostalgia and unease. My name is Alice Parker, and I've called this charming suburban enclave home for over 2 decades. The tree-lined streets and well-manicured lawns have been the backdrop to countless memories, both joyous and, as I would come to learn, deeply unsettling. Our community has always prided itself on its close-knit nature. We're the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone else's business, for better or worse. Block parties, neighborhood watch meetings, and impromptu gatherings on front porches are as much a part of our routine as breathing. It's a place where time seems to move a little slower, where the outside world's chaos feels distant and muted. I've always considered myself a pillar of this community. At 42 years old, I've dedicated my life to being the perfect wife and neighbor. My days are filled with volunteering at the local school, organizing charity events, and ensuring my home is a welcoming haven for my hardworking husband, John. He's a good man, John, even if his long hours at the office often leave me alone with my thoughts and the tick-tock of our antique grandfather clock for company. It was on one of those quiet afternoons, as I was tending to my prized rose bushes, that I first noticed her. Sophia Miller, the prodigal daughter of the Millers, had returned from college. I remember thinking how much she had changed in the years she'd been away. Gone was the awkward teenager with braces and ill-fitting clothes. In her place stood a young woman of 22, with an air of confidence and mystery that seemed almost out of place in our predictable little corner of the world. Our first real conversation happened a few days later when Sophia approached me as I was collecting my mail. She had a way of moving that drew the eye, graceful yet purposeful. "Mrs. Parker," she said, her voice carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place, "I was hoping I could talk to you sometime about, well, life after college. If you don't mind, that is." I was flattered, of course. It's not every day that a young woman seeks out the advice of someone like me. "Of course, dear," I replied, perhaps a bit too eagerly. "Why don't you come over for tea tomorrow afternoon?" And so began a series of meetings that would gradually shift the axis of my world. Sophia would arrive at my doorstep, always impeccably dressed, with a smile that seemed to hold secrets. We'd sit in my sunroom, surrounded by the lush greenery I'd cultivated over the years, and talk for hours. She'd ask about my experiences, my thoughts on marriage, career, and the challenges of adulthood. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. There was something refreshing about Sophia's presence in my life. She brought a vibrancy, a sense of possibility that had been missing. I hadn't realized how monotonous my days had become until this bright young thing entered my orbit, shaking up the routines I'd clung to for so long. It wasn't long before I began to hear whispers, though. Our neighborhood has always had an active grapevine, and Sophia quickly became its favorite topic. Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down mentioned seeing Sophia coming home late one night, looking disheveled. Old Mr. Johnson swore he'd seen her arguing with a man in a fancy car parked at the end of our street. Each new piece of gossip added to the growing tapestry of mystery surrounding the young woman I'd come to consider a friend. At first, I dismissed these rumors outright. After all, I knew Sophia, or at least I thought I did. She was intelligent, ambitious, and perhaps a bit unconventional, but surely not the source of scandal these whispers suggested. I defended her vehemently at our weekly book club meetings, chastising the other women for engaging in baseless speculation. But as the weeks wore on, I couldn't help but notice small inconsistencies in Sophia's stories. She'd mentioned plans to visit her parents for dinner, only for me to see her car still in the driveway late into the evening. There were phone calls she'd take in hushed tones, stepping outside my house with a furrowed brow. And once, just once, I caught a glimpse of what looked like a bruise on her wrist, quickly hidden by the sleeve of her cardigan. These observations gnawed at me, creating a constant low-level anxiety that began to permeate every aspect of my life. I found myself watching Sophia more closely, analyzing her words and actions with an intensity that both thrilled and disturbed me. Was I becoming one of those nosy neighbors I'd always despised? Or was there genuinely something amiss with the young woman who had so quickly become a fixture in my life? My husband, John, noticed the change in me. "You seem distracted lately, Alice," he said one evening as we sat down to dinner. "Is everything all right?" I plastered on a smile. The kind I'd perfected over years of being the perfect wife and neighbor. "Of course, dear. Just a bit tired, that's all." But the truth was, I was far from all right. I'd become obsessed with unraveling the mystery of Sophia Miller. Every interaction, every overheard conversation became a clue and a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. I began to question everything I thought I knew about our quiet little neighborhood and the people in it. As summer faded into autumn, the changes in Sophia became more pronounced. Her visits became less frequent, and when she did come by, there was a nervous energy about her that set me on edge. She'd lost weight, her designer clothes hanging a bit too loosely on her frame. The sparkle in her eyes that had so captivated me in the beginning was now replaced by a wary, almost haunted look. One particularly crisp October afternoon, Sophia arrived at my door unannounced. Her hair was windblown, her makeup slightly smudged. "Mrs. Parker," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need your help." Those 4 words sent a shiver down my spine. They were the catalyst for a series of events that would shatter the tranquil facade of our neighborhood and force me to confront truths about myself and those around me that I'd long buried beneath layers of suburban propriety. As I ushered Sophia into my living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the precipice of something monumental. The life I had so carefully constructed, the image I had cultivated, was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. Little did I know that this moment, this seemingly innocuous request for help, would be the first domino to fall in a complex chain of events that would expose the dark underbelly of our picturesque community. It would challenge everything I thought I knew about trust, loyalty, and the nature of evil lurking behind perfectly manicured lawns and freshly painted picket fences. As I closed the door behind us, shutting out the world beyond, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for whatever Sophia was about to reveal. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the seconds as they passed, each one bringing us closer to a truth that would change everything. In that moment, standing in my immaculate living room with Sophia's desperate eyes fixed upon me, I made a decision. Whatever was troubling this young woman, whatever secrets she was about to divulge, I would stand by her. I would be the ally she so clearly needed, even if it meant risking the carefully constructed life I'd built for myself. Little did I know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would not only reshape my understanding of our community, but also force me to confront long-buried aspects of my own psyche. As Sophia began to speak, her words barely above a whisper, I felt the foundations of my world begin to shift. The story she told me that afternoon was one of deception, manipulation, and danger. It painted a picture of our idyllic neighborhood that was so at odds with my perception that I found myself struggling to reconcile the two. But as Sophia's tale unfolded, the pieces began to fall into place. The late-night arguments, the mysterious bruises, the sudden changes in her demeanor. I listened with growing horror as she revealed the existence of a hidden network operating right under our noses, using the cover of our respectable community to conduct their illicit affairs. Names were mentioned. Names of people I'd known for years, people I trusted, people I'd invited into my home. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my living room, I realized that the Alice Parker who had started this day no longer existed. In her place was a woman faced with an impossible choice: to retreat back into the safety of ignorance or to step forward into a dangerous world of secrets and lies. I looked at Sophia, this young woman who had unwittingly brought chaos into my orderly life, and I made my choice. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We'll figure this out together." And so began the next chapter of my life, one that would test the limits of my courage, my loyalty, and my understanding of right and wrong. As I sat there, listening to Sophia's trembling voice recount tales of betrayal and corruption, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The clock on the mantel continued its steady rhythm, marking the passage of time as my world tilted on its axis. Outside, the streets of our neighborhood remained quiet, unaware of the storm that was brewing behind closed doors. But I knew that soon, very soon, the carefully maintained facade of our community would crumble, revealing the darkness that had always lurked just beneath the surface. As Sophia's story came to an end, I found myself filled with a mix of emotions: fear, anger, determination. But above all, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for far too long. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers we might face, I knew that I was exactly where I needed to be. The sun had long since set by the time Sophia left my house, our plans set in motion. As I watched her walk down the street, her figure disappearing into the gathering darkness, I felt a strange sense of exhilaration. For the first time in years, I was truly alive, every nerve ending tingling with anticipation of what was to come. I closed the door and leaned against it, my mind racing with the implications of everything I'd learned. The quiet tick of the clock seemed louder now, a constant reminder that time was of the essence. We had work to do, secrets to uncover, and a community to save, whether it wanted to be saved or not. As I made my way upstairs to bed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had started this day. There was a fire in her eyes, a set to her jaw that spoke of determination and resolve. I smiled at my reflection, a small, fierce smile that held the promise of things to come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and perhaps even new allies. But for now, I needed rest. As I slipped into bed beside my sleeping husband, I allowed myself one last moment of reflection on the day's events. Then, with a deep breath, I closed my eyes and surrendered to sleep, knowing that when I woke, it would be to a world forever changed. The adventure that lay ahead would test me in ways I could never have imagined, but I was ready. Ready to fight, ready to uncover the truth, ready to protect those who needed protecting. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed through my mind. The game was afoot, and Alice Parker was playing to win. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself increasingly drawn into Sophia's world. What had started as a simple mentorship had evolved into something far more complex, a relationship that defied easy categorization. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this young woman than met the eye, a depth of experience and emotion that belied her youthful appearance. At times, Sophia would disappear for days on end, her absence leaving an inexplicable void in my life. Then, just as suddenly, she would reappear, often at the most unexpected moments. I'd be tending to my garden, lost in thought, only to turn around and find her standing there, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. These encounters always left me slightly off balance, as if I'd stepped into a world where the normal rules no longer applied. Despite her mercurial nature, or perhaps because of it, I found myself opening up to Sophia in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. Our conversations, once centered on her seeking advice, had evolved into a two-way street of confidences shared and secrets revealed. I told her things I'd never dared voice aloud before. My frustrations with the monotony of suburban life, the growing distance between John and me, the dreams I'd abandoned in pursuit of being the perfect wife and neighbor. In return, Sophia began to peel back the layers of her own life, revealing a troubled family history that made my heart ache. She spoke of a domineering father, a mother who'd retreated into a world of prescription pills and denial, and the suffocating weight of expectations that had driven her to flee to college. As she shared these pieces of herself, I felt a fierce protectiveness welling up inside me, a desire to shield this young woman from the harshness of the world. But it wasn't until a chilly autumn evening, as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, that Sophia finally revealed the dark secret that had been haunting her. Her words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other as if she feared that if she paused, she might lose the courage to continue. What she told me shook me to my core, revelations so shocking and disturbing that I found myself struggling to breathe. Sophia's father, the respected businessman and pillar of the community, was involved in activities so heinous that my mind recoiled from the very thought of them. Human trafficking, money laundering, blackmail, the list of crimes seemed endless. And Sophia, my sweet, troubled Sophia, had stumbled upon evidence that could bring his entire empire crashing down. As she spoke, tears streaming down her face, I felt as if the ground beneath my feet had suddenly given way. This wasn't just some family squabble or youthful rebellion. This was something dark and dangerous, a situation with potentially life-altering consequences. My first instinct was to pull back, to distance myself from this toxic secret and the danger it represented. But as I looked into Sophia's eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, I knew I couldn't abandon her. "We'll figure this out," I heard myself saying, my voice sounding far steadier than I felt. "You're not alone in this, Sophia. I'm here for you." The relief that washed over her face was palpable, and as she threw her arms around me in a fierce hug, I felt a surge of determination. Whatever it took, I would help this young woman find a way out of the nightmare she was living. What I didn't realize at that moment was just how deeply I was about to become entangled in Sophia's world. As the days passed, I found myself devoting more and more time to helping her gather evidence, researching legal options, and planning for every possible contingency. Our clandestine meetings became more frequent, often stretching late into the night as we pored over documents and debated our next moves. My own life began to take a back seat to this secret mission. The house, once immaculate, began to show signs of neglect. Dinner was often takeout or hastily thrown together meals. John's questioning looks and pointed comments about my distraction went largely ignored. Even my involvement in community activities, once a source of pride and purpose, began to wane. I was vaguely aware of a whisper starting to circulate through the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson's raised eyebrows when she saw Sophia leaving my house at odd hours. The way conversations would abruptly halt when I approached a group of neighbors. Even John's increasingly frequent late nights at the office felt like an unspoken accusation. But I couldn't bring myself to care about any of it. The Alice Parker who had once lived for the approval of others seemed like a distant memory. In her place was a woman driven by a sense of purpose and righteous anger. The more I learned about the depths of corruption in our seemingly idyllic community, the more determined I became to see justice done. There were moments, usually in the dead of night when the house was silent and still, that doubt would creep in. Was I doing the right thing? Was I risking too much? My marriage, my reputation, perhaps even my safety, for a cause that might be hopeless? But then I would remember the look in Sophia's eyes that first night she confided in me. The mix of fear and hope, and my resolve would strengthen once more. As weeks turned into months, the web we were weaving grew ever more complex. Sophia's father, sensing that something was amiss, began to tighten his control over her life. Our meetings became more furtive, our communications more coded. I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, jumping at unexpected noises, and scrutinizing every casual interaction for hidden meanings. The strain was beginning to show not just on me but on Sophia as well. The vibrant young woman I had first met was fading, replaced by someone more guarded, more haunted. There were days when I caught glimpses of the old Sophia, a flash of her mischievous smile, a moment of carefree laughter, but they were becoming increasingly rare. It was on a particularly tense afternoon, as we huddled in my sunroom going over some newly acquired financial records, that the precarious nature of our situation truly hit home. A car door slammed outside, startling us both. Sophia's face drained of color, and for a moment, I saw raw terror in her eyes. It turned out to be nothing more than a neighbor returning home. But the moment lingered, a stark reminder of the danger we were courting. That night, after Sophia had gone and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in months. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, lines of worry etched around her mouth, a general air of furtiveness that seemed at odds with the Alice Parker I had once been. For a brief, dizzying moment, I contemplated walking away from it all. I could tell Sophia that I couldn't help her anymore, return to my life of garden parties and charity committees, pretend that I had never glimpsed the darkness lurking beneath our community's polished surface. But even as the thought formed, I knew it was impossible. I was in too deep, too invested, too changed by what I now knew. As I turned away from the mirror and made my way to bed, where John lay already asleep, his back turned to my side of the bed, I made a silent vow. We would see this through, Sophia and I. We would expose the truth, no matter the cost. And when it was all over, I would find a way to reconcile the woman I had been with the woman I was becoming. Little did I know that the true test of my resolve was yet to come. The events that would unfold in the coming weeks would push me to my limits, forcing me to confront not just the evil in others, but the capacity for darkness within myself. As I slipped into an uneasy sleep, the first hints of a plan were already forming in my mind, a plan that would either be our salvation or our downfall. The clock on the bedside table ticked steadily, counting down the hours until dawn. Another day in this new, precarious reality was about to begin. And I, Alice Parker, once the very model of suburban propriety, was ready to face whatever challenges it might bring. For Sophia, for justice, and for the woman I was becoming, I would see this through to the end. The night that changed everything started like any other. I had been helping Sophia organize some documents in her room, a task we'd done countless times before. But as I reached for a folder on her desk, my elbow knocked over a small wooden box. It clattered to the floor, its contents spilling out across the hardwood. Among the scattered items, something caught my eye, a flash of metal that didn't belong among the usual teenage trinkets. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was a key, unremarkable at first glance, but as I turned it over, I saw a series of numbers etched into its surface. In that moment, a cold realization washed over me. This wasn't just any key. It was the key to a safety deposit box, one that Sophia had sworn she knew nothing about when we were investigating her father's financial records. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this discovery. Had Sophia been lying to me all this time? Was she somehow involved in her father's criminal activities? The trust we'd built over the past months suddenly felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest breath. I don't know how long I stood there, the key burning in my palm, before I heard Sophia's footsteps on the stairs. In a panic, I shoved the key into my pocket, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she'd hear it as she entered the room. "Mrs. Parker? Is everything okay?" Sophia's voice was light, casual, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I'd never noticed before. Or had I simply been blind to it all this time? I turned to face her, struggling to keep my expression neutral. "Sophia," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." What happened next is still a blur in my memory. I confronted her about the key, my words tumbling out in a confused jumble of accusations and pleas for explanation. For a moment, Sophia's face was a mask of shock, then something shifted in her eyes. The warmth I'd grown accustomed to vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Alice," she said, her voice dripping with a condescension I'd never heard from her before. "You really should have left well enough alone." In that moment, I saw Sophia, truly saw her for the first time. Gone was the vulnerable young woman I'd taken under my wing. In her place stood someone dangerous, someone who had been playing me like a finely tuned instrument from the very beginning. She advanced towards me, her movements fluid and predatory. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but my body seemed frozen in place. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into," Sophia continued, her voice low and threatening. "Did you really think you could take on my father? That you, a bored housewife, could unravel an empire built over decades?" Her words stung, but it was the look in her eyes that truly terrified me. There was no remorse there, no hint of the Sophia I thought I knew. Just a cold, hard determination that spoke of years of deception. I don't remember how I got out of that room, out of that house. My next clear memory is of sitting in my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The realization of how deeply I'd been deceived, how thoroughly I'd been manipulated, hit me like a physical blow. For days after that confrontation, I moved through my life in a daze. I jumped at every sound, flinched at every unexpected movement. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. My nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Sophia, searching for the clues I'd missed. John noticed the change in me, of course. How could he not? The woman he'd married, the perfect homemaker and community organizer, had been replaced by a jittery, paranoid shell. But his concerns, his questions, felt distant, unimportant in the face of the danger I now knew existed in our midst. It all came to a head at the annual neighborhood block party. I'd almost forgotten about it, lost as I was in my own private hell, but John insisted we attend. "It'll be good for you," he said, his voice a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Get out of the house, see our friends." Friends. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. How many of them were involved in this web of deceit? How many smiling faces hid dark secrets? As we made our way down the street, the sounds of laughter and music grating on my frayed nerves, I saw her. Sophia stood across the road, engaged in animated conversation with Mrs. Henderson. She looked perfectly at ease, the very picture of a carefree young woman enjoying a summer evening. Our eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment, the world around us seemed to fade away. The look she gave me was a complex mixture of warning and mockery, a silent reminder of the power she held over me. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my hands beginning to tremble. "Alice, are you all right?" John's voice broke through the fog of fear that had descended over me. I turned to him, trying to form a response, but the words wouldn't come. That's when I noticed the sudden hush that had fallen over our immediate vicinity. Looking around, I saw concerned and curious faces turned in our direction. Had they seen the exchange between Sophia and me? Had my mask of normalcy finally slipped enough for them to see the terror that had become my constant companion? In that moment, standing amidst the cheerful decorations and smiling neighbors, I realized the true gravity of my situation. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. This was about survival. Sophia and her father, whoever they truly were, whatever they were involved in, posed a very real threat not just to me, but to everything and everyone I held dear. I needed to find a way out, to extricate myself from this tangled web before it was too late. But as I stood there, feeling Sophia's eyes boring into me from across the street, a cold certainty settled in the pit of my stomach. It was already too late. I was in too deep, knew too much. There would be no easy escape from this nightmare. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I went through the motions, making small talk, laughing at jokes I didn't hear, all the while acutely aware of Sophia's presence on the periphery of my vision. She never approached me directly, but I could feel her watching, waiting. As John and I walked home later that night, his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that should have been comforting but now felt suffocating, I made a decision. I couldn't continue like this, living in fear, jumping at shadows. I needed to take action, to regain control of my life somehow. But what could I do? Going to the police seemed out of the question. If Sophia's father was as powerful as she'd implied, who knew how far his influence reached? And even if I could find someone to trust, what evidence did I have beyond my own increasingly unreliable memories? No, I realized as we reached our front door, I would have to handle this on my own. Somehow, I needed to find a way to turn the tables on Sophia, to uncover enough evidence to bring down her father's empire without implicating myself in the process. As I lay in bed that night, listening to John's steady breathing beside me, my mind raced with possibilities. I thought of the key I discovered, now hidden away in a spot I prayed was secure. Could that be the key to unraveling this whole mystery? For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was a dangerous hope, one that could very well lead me further into peril, but it was hope nonetheless. Tomorrow I decided I would begin my own investigation. I would delve into the dark underbelly of our picture-perfect community, armed with nothing but my wits and a desperate determination to reclaim my life. As I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed through my mind. The game had changed, and this time, I would be the one making the rules. Little did I know that the path I was about to embark on would test me in ways I could never have imagined, forcing me to confront not just the evil around me, but the darkness within my own heart. The clock on the nightstand ticked steadily, counting down the hours until dawn. Another day in this new, precarious reality was about to begin. And I, Alice Parker, once the very model of suburban propriety, was ready to fight back. For my family, for my sanity, and for the woman I used to be, I would see this through to the bitter end. The day that would change everything dawned like any other, deceptively calm and ordinary. I remember standing in my kitchen, mechanically going through the motions of making coffee, when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sophia. "We need to talk. My house. 1 hour. Come alone." My hands shook as I read those words, nearly dropping the phone. I knew this moment had been coming, had felt it building like a storm on the horizon. But now that it was here, I felt woefully unprepared. As I made my way to Sophia's house, every step felt like I was walking to my own execution. The neighborhood was quiet, most people at work or school, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By the time I reached Sophia's front door, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. Sophia answered on the first knock, her face a mask of cold determination. "Come in," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth it once held. As I stepped inside, I noticed the house was eerily silent. No sign of her parents or any other life. We faced each other in her living room, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Sophia spoke first, her words sharp and cutting. "I know what you've been doing, Alice. The snooping, the questions. Did you really think you could outsmart me? That you could take on my father's empire and win?" I tried to speak, to defend myself, but she cut me off. "Save it. I'm done playing games. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to back off, forget everything you think you know. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows about your little obsession with me. How do you think John will react when he finds out his wife has been sneaking around with a college girl?" The threat hung in the air between us, and I felt something inside me snap. All the fear, all the anger, all the frustration of the past months came rushing to the surface. "You can't do this," I heard myself saying, my voice rising. "You can't just threaten me and expect me to roll over. I know what your father's done, what you've been involved in. Do you really think I'll just walk away?" Sophia's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in them. "Oh, Alice," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." She took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed away, feeling the edge of a side table press against my hip. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic, a heavy crystal paperweight. Without thinking, my fingers closed around it. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sophia lunged forward, her hand reaching for my throat. I saw a flash of something in her other hand. Was it a knife? In that moment, pure instinct took over. I swung the paperweight with all my might. There was a sickening thud as it connected with Sophia's temple. Her eyes went wide with shock, then blank. She crumpled to the floor, a thin trickle of blood starting to pool beneath her head. For a moment, I stood there, frozen in horror at what I'd done. Then reality came crashing back in. Oh God! What have I done? Is she dead? Did I just kill her? I dropped to my knees beside Sophia's still form, my hands shaking as I felt for a pulse. There was nothing. No rise and fall of her chest, no flutter beneath my fingertips. The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. Sophia was dead, and I had killed her. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I stared at her lifeless body. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened, what I should do next. Call the police? Run? Try to hide the body? Each option seemed more impossible than the last. As I knelt there, paralyzed by indecision, I became acutely aware of the world outside. A dog barked in the distance. A car door slammed. The normal sounds of a suburban afternoon that now seemed surreal in the face of what had just transpired. I don't know how long I stayed there, my mind a whirlwind of fear and regret. But eventually, a cold, rational part of my brain took over. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be found like this. I had to do something, anything, to protect myself. With trembling hands, I began to clean up. I wiped down every surface I might have touched, wrapped Sophia's body in a rug from the living room. Each action felt mechanical, as if I was watching someone else go through these motions. As I worked, a plan began to form in my mind. It was desperate, probably foolish, but it was all I had. I would dispose of the body, make it look like Sophia had run away. It wasn't perfect, but it might buy me some time. Just as I was preparing to move Sophia's body, a knock at the door nearly stopped my heart. "Sophia, are you home, dear?" It was Mrs. Henderson's voice, cheerful and oblivious to the horror inside. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, I heard her footsteps retreating down the path. But the close call shook me to my core. How many other neighbors had seen me come here? How long before someone came looking for Sophia? In that moment, I made a decision that would seal my fate. I couldn't risk moving the body now. There were too many eyes, too many chances to be seen. Instead, I would have to hide it here in plain sight, and pray that I could keep up the charade long enough to figure out a more permanent solution. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I managed to move Sophia's body to the basement, concealing it as best I could. Then, I set about staging the house to look as if Sophia had left in a hurry. A half-packed suitcase in her room. A note hastily scribbled about needing to get away for a while. As I worked, I could feel the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a shroud. This wasn't just about keeping a secret anymore. This was about covering up a death, a murder. I had crossed a line that I could never uncross. By the time I left Sophia's house, the sun was beginning to set. I walked home on shaky legs, every rustle of leaves, every distant voice making me jump. As I approached my own house, I saw John's car in the driveway. He was home early. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for what was to come. I would have to lie to my husband, to everyone. I would have to become someone else entirely if I wanted to survive this. As I opened the front door, plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, pale, wide-eyed, with a haunted look that I feared would never truly leave. "Alice, is that you?" John called from the living room. "Where have you been all day?" I took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the first of what I knew would be many lies. "Just out for a walk, dear," I called back, my voice surprisingly steady. Lost track of time as I joined John in the living room. Accepting his kiss on the cheek with a forced smile, I knew that my life as I knew it was over. From this moment on, every word, every action would be part of an elaborate performance. One misstep, one moment of weakness, and everything would come crashing down. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the passage of time in this new, terrifying reality. I, Alice Parker, once the very picture of suburban respectability, had become a killer, a liar, a woman with everything to lose and no way back. As I sat down to dinner with my unsuspecting husband, I silently vowed to do whatever it took to protect my secret, to survive this nightmare I had created. Little did I know that the true test of my resolve was yet to come, that the events set in motion this day would lead me down a path darker and more dangerous than I could ever have imagined. The game had changed once again, and this time, the stakes were life and death. As I picked up my food, nodding along to John's chatter about his day, my mind was already racing, planning, scheming. Whatever came next, I would be ready. I had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. Capítulo 5. Desdobramento e consequências. Após o incidente, uma investigação começa, e os vizinhos começam a falar sobre a relação em comum entre Alice e Sophia. Alice tenta voltar à normalidade, mas a culpa e o medo a consomem. John começa a desconfiar que algo está muito errado com a esposa. As evidências começam a se acumular, e a polícia local começa a seguir pistas que levam a um desfecho inevitável. No momento final, Alice é confrontada por suas escolhas e pela verdade que tentou esconder. A revelação é devastadora. Sophia, mesmo ausente, continua a assombrar a vida de Alice, enquanto a justiça finalmente alcança todos os envolvidos. As I sit here in this cold, sterile room, staring at the blank walls that have become my world, I can't help but marvel at how quickly a life can unravel. It seems like only yesterday that I was Alice Parker, the perfect suburban housewife, known for my immaculate home and my involvement in every community event. Now I'm inmate number 46287, a cautionary tale whispered about in the neighborhood I once called home. The days since that fateful afternoon with Sophia have blurred together, a nightmarish montage of fear, guilt, and desperate attempts to maintain a facade of normalcy. For a while I thought I might actually get away with it. I played the part of the concerned neighbor when Sophia's disappearance was first noticed. I comforted her distraught parents, all the while feeling the weight of my terrible secret threatening to crush me. But secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply we try to bury them. It was Mrs. Henderson who first noticed the strange smell coming from Sophia's house. The police were called, and within hours, my carefully constructed lie began to crumble. I remember the moment they found her body as if it were happening right now. The commotion outside, the flashing lights, the horrified gasps of my neighbors, and then the knock on my door. Two stern-faced detectives, their eyes boring into me as if they could see the guilt written on my soul. "Mrs. Parker," one of them said, his voice grave, "we need to ask you a few questions about Sophia Miller." In that moment, I knew it was over. The house of cards I'd built came crashing down around me. I confessed everything. The friendship with Sophia, the discovery of her family's dark secrets, the confrontation that led to her death. The words poured out of me in a torrent, as if by confessing, I could somehow undo what I'd done. The arrest was a blur. I remember John's face, a mask of shock and betrayal as they led me away. The neighbors I'd known for years watched from their porches, their expressions a mix of horror and morbid fascination. In the span of a few hours, I'd gone from being the heart of our community to its darkest secret. The trial was a media circus. Our quiet suburban neighborhood became the center of a national obsession. Every detail of my life, of my relationship with Sophia, was dissected and analyzed. Reporters camped out on our street, eager for any new tidbit of information. The community I'd once been so proud of became a fishbowl, its residents unwilling participants in a real-life crime drama. As I sat in the courtroom, day after day, I watched as my life was laid bare for all to see. Friends and neighbors I'd known for years took the stand, their testimony painting a picture of a woman none of them truly knew. John testified too, his voice breaking as he described the changes he'd noticed in me, the secrets I'd kept from him. The verdict, when it came, was no surprise. Guilty of manslaughter. The judge's words as he handed down my sentence still echo in my mind. Mrs. Parker, your actions have not only taken a young life but have also shattered the trust and safety of an entire community. The court cannot overlook the severity of your crime. And so here I am. My days are now marked by the monotonous routine of prison life, a far cry from the busy social calendar I once kept. The irony isn't lost on me. I, who once prided myself on being the perfect neighbor, am now isolated from all human connection. John filed for divorce shortly after my sentencing. I can't blame him. The woman he married died the day I took Sophia's life. My children, now grown, struggle to reconcile the mother they knew with the woman revealed in court. Their visits are infrequent and strained, filled with awkward silences and unasked questions. As for our neighborhood, I hear it's changed. The once friendly streets are now marked by suspicion and distrust. People keep to themselves, wary of forming the kinds of close bonds that led to such tragedy. The community events I used to organize have become somber affairs if they happen at all. Sophia's parents moved away, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss. Their house stood empty for months, a silent monument to the life cut short within its walls. I'm told it finally sold, at a fraction of its worth, to a young couple unaware of its history. In my darkest moments, I find myself wondering about the path that led me here. How did Alice Parker, model citizen, become a killer? Was it a sudden snap, a moment of madness? Or was it a slow erosion of morality, a gradual descent into darkness facilitated by my own curiosity and Sophia's manipulation? The truth, I've come to realize, is both simpler and more complex. We all carry within us the capacity for both good and evil. The line between the two is thinner than we'd like to believe. One decision, one moment of weakness, can be all it takes to cross that line. My story has become a cautionary tale, a warning whispered by parents to their children about the dangers of getting too involved in others' lives. Remember what happened to Mrs. Parker, they say, as if my name alone is enough to encapsulate the tragedy that unfolded. And perhaps it is. Perhaps that will be my legacy. Not the years I spent building a community, but the moment I destroyed it. The perfect neighbor who harbored the darkest secret. The trusted friend who betrayed that trust in the most horrific way possible. As I face the years stretching ahead of me in this place, I find myself hoping that some good can come from my story. That perhaps, by serving as a warning, I can prevent others from making the same mistakes I did. That the tragedy that befell our neighborhood might serve as a wake-up call, reminding people to look beyond the perfect facades we all present to the world. Because the truth is, we never really know what's happening behind closed doors. The smiling face at the neighborhood barbecue might be hiding a world of pain. The friendly wave from across the street could be masking desperate loneliness. We are all, in our own ways, keeping secrets. My advice, for what it's worth from someone who has lost everything, is this: be kind, be compassionate, but be cautious. Don't let curiosity override your better judgment. And most importantly, remember that even in the most picture-perfect communities, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. As for me, I'll continue to serve my time, carrying the weight of my actions and the memory of Sophia with me every day. I'll never be able to undo what I've done, never be able to bring back the life I took, But perhaps, in sharing my story, I can prevent others from following the same destructive path. The sun is setting outside my small window, casting long shadows across the prison yard. Another day is ending, much like the ones before it, and the many still to come. But as I watch the sky turn from blue to orange to deep purple, I allow myself a small moment of hope. Hope that somewhere out there, someone will hear my story and think twice before getting too deeply involved in the lives of others. Hope that the tragedy that unfolded in our quiet suburban neighborhood might serve as a lesson for others. Because in the end, that's all I have left: hope. Hope for redemption. Hope for forgiveness. Hope that someday, somehow, I might find a way to make amends for the terrible choices I made. And as I close my eyes, preparing for another night in this place that has become my home, I whisper a quiet prayer for Sophia, for my family, and for the community I left behind. May they find peace, even if I never do. When secrets are buried deeply, even the most tranquil neighborhood can hide unimaginable dangers. Subscribe to the channel for more intriguing stories.